In this lecture, I want to talk about internal links or references, which are extremely important because they provide a way for you to manipulate your content, which you may want to do for your own benefit or to make it easier to understand for someone else who is accessing it. If you recall, in the process improvement lecture, I used a set of links to unfold this map by clicking on one which showed part of the map, and I clicked on another one and it unfolded part of it, and I walked through it. By the time we finish this lecture, you'll understand and be able to do that on your own. So what I did was I started with this map. I went to switch maps and I told it I wanted to make a new map called internal links, and because I didn't specify anything else, it ended up with the same perspective as a default. So I have this, and then I decided that I wanted the new elements that I added to explain internal links to be a different color. So I went to perspective, used decorate elements, and created a new definition for element type iLink is orange, and if you'll notice that all of these have a type of iLink. So because all of the pieces of a map that you refer to, the map name, the perspective, the element, the loop, and the connection, because there's no restrictions on the naming conventions, the question was, how do you do something so that you don't drive the users nuts trying to figure out how to code links to these items that may have multiple spaces in various places and special characters. What the developers came up with is something called a slug. A slug is simply a label with all of the special characters removed, convert all spaces to a single dash, and change everything to lowercase. So the things are not case sensitive. All the special characters are done, and anytime there's one or more spaces, it turns into a single dash. So if you take something like time spent working, which is here, it's actually two words, but between spent and working there are actually two spaces. That actually slugs out to time-spent-working in all lowercase, and it makes it easy to refer to it. And if you happen to change the spacing of it, the links still work. I mean, if you're putting text inside of elements, you're often going back and changing the spacing so that it sort of breaks in the places that you want it to. So the way that you refer to map names, perspective names, elements, connections, and loops within a project for internal links is using something called slugs. Now, the way that you use slugs is slightly different depending upon whether you're referring to elements, connections, or loops, or whether you're referring to maps and perspectives. So we'll talk about those separately. If we go over here and talk about elements, loops, connections, and loops, this is the same basic format for an external link in that it's some visible label that shows in brackets, and then in the parentheses it's equal, pound, and then whatever the slug is. And the pound sign sort of is an indicator that what follows it is a slugged label of something. So, and this just is a bullet item. So if you actually code this, what happens if you click on it, it takes you, well, depends upon whether or not you, let me get back to where I was. Come on, back. If I mouse over it, it brings that into view, and if I move off of it, it goes back to where it was. So the nice thing about internal links is you can use them to move someone around in a model without actually having to go there, or if you do want to go there, if they click on it, it will take them there. And then you can use the back button to go back to where you were. So this one the B1 work harder is the same form, even though this is a loop. It figures out whether it's a connection or an element or a loop. And there are things to do if you happen to have elements with the same name loops, and we'll talk about that later. So this was an example of actually centering a loop label. Okay? I said that maps and perspectives are a slightly different form in that there is no equal sign. It's just the label in brackets, a pound sign, and then the map name, and then the perspective name. Now, whether you use the perspective name or not depends. Every map that's defined has a default perspective for it. If you simply specify whatever the map name is, it uses the default perspective. If you want to explicitly display some other map with other than the default perspective, you simply code and say, I want this map with this perspective. So here, this goes back to this internal links map and uses the default perspective. The second one takes me to the environment map, which has a different perspective. If you look at this, the default for this is the default perspective map, which is the label given to the default perspective that's created when you create the project. If you then go back, the third example was coded so that it says I want internal links with the standard perspective, which is different than the one that's defaulted here. So if I click on this, notice it then puts this perspective on this map, even though this is not the default. This is the default one for this map. But what I've done is I've changed the perspective on the fly in terms of the way that the map is decorated. And you can do that extensively so that all of the decorations that are defined in the perspective could be completely different in another perspective than in the one that you are on. And right on the fly, you can cause Kumu to switch perspectives. Let me do this again. If I do this, I've switched perspectives. If I go back to here again and click this, it'll put the perspective back to the way it was. So the map and perspective options provides you with a way to actually make a very major transformation in the way that the particular set of content is displayed. Now, from the connection and the map perspective, you can also have a form where you can go to another map and perspective and a particular item, not just to the map itself. So that if you look at this, this says this goes to the B2 causal loop on this map, and this particular item, the perspective isn't specified because I'm willing to use the default one. So if I click here, it takes me to this map. And if you're confused about where you are at any time, all you need to do is look at the URL up here, and it'll sort of sort out in that here's my username, here's the project that I'm in, here's the map that I'm on, and here's the particular item that it's centered on. If I go back and then click to this standard perspective, but it says the map perspective item, if I click on this, it leaves me in the same place. So I've changed the perspective, but I haven't gone anyplace. And then the last one simply changes the perspective back to, I'm on the same map, I changed the perspective to process improvement, but I want to stay on the same item. So this changes the perspective back, but I haven't gone anyplace. So it's another level of control over the way that you can change the view on the fly for the user based upon what it is that you're trying to convey. Now, the last part for this segment is there's also the option to add a focus. Remember when in this particular model, when I clicked the first time, what it did was it brought this loop into view and it hid everything else. That's done with excuse me, a focus option, which is the same as the focus option that you can select down here. So rather than simply doing it manually, it allows you to do it in the code on the fly so that you can specify a map perspective, the item, question mark, focus equals, and a number. Now note that you can specify the focus as being 0, which is just the item itself, those things connected to it 2 degrees away and 3 degrees away. So if I take this to say B1 work harder focus 0, then it just displays that particular loop. But if I selected the second one, which says focus equals 1, now it shows me the loop and all of those things connected to the elements of the loop. And it's just a set of options that allows you to govern how you want to present the content to whoever is interacting with the map. Now, while this is all extremely probably difficult to figure out, the easiest way is to let Kumu figure it out for you. So that if I simply select this, you can look here and say, oh, okay, I am now pointing at the internal links map and this particular loop name. If I select this and then go down here and say focus equals 1, notice that I now have the map name, the item name, and focus equals 1, so I can select this, copy it, and go paste it in the link definition that I'm creating. Because as much time as I spend with Kumu, I still find it difficult to remember all of the options that are available for coding internal links and references. What makes it easy is that Kumu can actually do it for me so I don't have to remember all the pieces. I just go ahead and select the things that I want and look at the URL that it creates and then use that URL in an internal reference. Now, there's one more component of this called selector, which I'll cover in the next lecture, which is even deeper down the rabbit hole and alone probably as powerful as all the pieces that have already been presented. So, hope you found this meaningful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.